Hello and welcome to In Conversation, a Dub Lab podcast where each week we will bring you interviews from the Dub Lab radio archives.
You're listening to dublab.com. My name is Jenny NONO, and
I'm Ewa Wojciak.
My special guest today on SS Extension course. So Ewa, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
I understand you've been through a whirlwind of situations this last week or so, but I really appreciate you coming in. I'm very excited.
Thank you. This is going to be the sanest moment this whole week, so
wow,
I'm excited.
Okay. Good to hear.
I hope.
Yeah. So Ewa, tell us a little bit about NOMAG.
Okay.
Well, first let me do a little intro. At least Ewa is one of the publishers of NOMAG magazine, which was around from 1978 to 1984, and it's a punk culture. Would you say like
fashion
art,
trash, garbage, Nancy Reagan, you name it, we had it.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, a magazine. It incorporates all of those beautiful things. And I asked her to come in today to tell us a little bit more about it and to tell us some wild stories. Because she lived through all of that, and it'd just be really great to hear some stories.
Okay. So I can tell you a little bit about how the magazine started.
Okay.
And then I'll try to remember stories. I'm old. So the magazine is the brainchild of Bruce Kalberg, who was my partner for many, many years. And Bruce started the magazine with Mike Girard, who now is pretty well known for a band called the Swans. But they met in art school at Otis Art Institute. And Bruce had just come back from England, where he had studied art as well. And they got together and started the magazine, and it was just kind of a crazy magazine that coincided with the beginning of the punk era in Hollywood. And they were two Hollywood guys who were going out and seeing a lot of bands, interested in music, interested in the Hollywood culture.
So I'm curious though, what places would they go to see these bands? Do they still exist to this day?
Well, I'm
Hollywood.
I would say no.
Yeah.
But
were they like small hole in the wall kind of clubs, like very DIY?
Yeah, I mean there just wasn't very much in that period of time, and I didn't come into the magazine till I met Bruce when Mike Girard left, and he left to move to New York and form a band. And Bruce and I moved in together, and the magazine after that was published from my living room.
Amazing.
So for the next 11 issues took place in the living room, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes in the bathroom, but everything became a studio. So you're asking about the clubs. There were really no real clubs. There were events that would happen. So one of the early ones was at the Elks Club Lodge, Elks Lodge, which is near MacArthur Park. And some bands played, and it turned into quite a big riot, really. The LAPD came out in force, and there was nothing going on. There was just really a bunch of kids listening to bands in a large auditorium. And the entire LAPD came out for that and marched up the stairs in formations and hit people, bloodied people. People ran, and it was was terrifying. It was really terrifying, and I think more than anything, it really united the community as one.
I would imagine, as like cop haters. Yeah.
So I mean, that was, it was scary. It was really scary because people didn't know how to find people they had come with. They didn't know where their cars were. They didn't know they were getting home. And in those days, there was no Uber, there was no Lyft, and everybody really had to figure out. There was no cell phones.
Oh yeah.
So getting places was complex. There was no internet.
Yeah.
So everything was word of mouth, and when you lost your people, it was scary. But other clubs were Madame Wong's was an early club in Chinatown, and the Hong Kong Cafe, and there was a place called Blackie's, started by Paul Greenstein. And then afterwards, we used to all go to the Atomic Cafe, which was in Little Tokyo in those days, and it was open late, and we would all sit there all night long and listen to the jukebox. There was a wonderful place in LA called Vickman's, which was a diner, and it opened for the truckers where it was near the produce mart, and we used to go there and wait for donuts to come out after the clubs Madame Wong's closed or other places closed.
Yeah.
So LA had it was a very small scene, but very sort of specific. Everybody could find each other early on.
I love that. So what was, I have a question about, so, like, what was Chinatown and Little Tokyo like back in the day? Was it
non-existent?
Non-existent. That's what I imagined, I guess. I was like, it's so cool to hear that there was like stuff going on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's all of these places were kind of ghost towns, and when I think that's why the clubs were able to form in those places is because they really had very little to no business, and so they welcomed kids or anybody coming in, and so Chinatown was easy because it was just, I mean, there were two clubs, and they were across the street from each other, and the same bands played, and you either played at one or you played at the other.
That's so cool.
Yeah. No, it was, but it was a lot of fun, I would say, and there was later on there was. Other places like the Café de Grand, which was in Hollywood on a side street, which is, I think, a live-work loft now, the building or gym or something. And in those days, it was really down the side street, and you would walk in, and it was also a Chinese restaurant at the top, and then you would be able to go downstairs, and there was a lounge downstairs that you couldn't see from the street, so that was a club. And on Hollywood Boulevard there was a place called Raji's, which was a Indian restaurant that was a punk club also, that had sort of a main dining area where bands would play.
Was this like a common thing for a restaurant to be like also like a place for bands to play?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's none of these places really had enough. Early on there weren't enough bands that wanted to play, and there wasn't enough. I don't know how to explain exactly, but in the late 70s, there was kids coming out of art schools. Kids in Hollywood didn't have money, and so a lot of the businesses aren't as crowded as they are now. Like now you go down Hollywood Boulevard and every place is filled. You go down Koreatown, every place is filled at night. Then it was really, really thin. Yeah. So I think everybody, I think just wanted the business. So
they're just like, we don't care about your music, and we don't really like.
They didn't know what it was. It wasn't that they didn't. It wasn't. They couldn't even be scared of it or intimidated by it or anything, because there was nothing like it prior. Yeah, there was nothing. So.
I guess in my mind, I just imagine them being like kind of intimidated, but being like, oh, well, whatever, It's
no. They were just happy to have business.
Oh, wow.
So and I have to say that the early punk scene in Hollywood was super nice.
Oh.
It was friendly. It's just, I mean, people associate a certain kind of cliche punks, like they're going to tear the place up and do all this horrible stuff. And in the early days, it really wasn't that kind of scene. It was mostly social, and it was friendly, and it was really about making stuff and inventing yourself and creating, an identity for yourself. And it was the sort of the Reagan, at the tail end of the Reagan era, where, it's which killed Hollywood, because what happened is they let Reagan didn't have support for hospitals, and so there were a lot of mental patients that were let out onto the streets, and it really shut areas of the town down. So I think everybody welcomed the kids, early on.
That's really good to know.
And it was easy to find a dead space, There were lots available.
Wow.
People lived in many of the buildings on Broadway. It wasn't studio space then. It was just a hole, that you could put on a show, or you can make something happen.
So downtown was basically like a ghost town too back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
Because not too long, well, maybe it was a while ago, like when I first kind of moved to LA in the early 2000s, I felt like even then it was a ghost town.
Yeah, it's gone through two sort of periods of trying to be a city, and I think right now it's succeeding pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to do. Then there was nothing to do.
Yeah, or like you'd go there at like even before like midnight, and there would be no one around, and you're like,
Yeah. So when we started the magazine, it was easy in a way, because we could, I should say that at that time, I was the first art director of the LA Weekly. I designed the prototype. And the Weekly was a brand new newspaper to Los Angeles. There was nothing. And the Weekly did something that other papers didn't do, which is they provided a calendar of what was happening around town. And because of that, I was standing in a place that was the center of the city, because every band, every store owner, everybody had to come into the Weekly to notify us of what their events were, to run an ad, to get a listing.
Yeah.
And so I met a tremendous amount of people, and I knew what was going on. So many people that worked at the Weekly were also involved with the clubs, were also involved with NOMAG, because I was in this sort of hub where all this information passed through. And so I would hear about stores opening, and Melrose in those days was a complete ghost town too. There were only a couple stores. The punk stores, the early punk stores were Poseur, Cowboys and Poodles. So there were only a few places where people could shop. I mean, it sounds really crazy, but that's why you get the whole thrift store culture. There was no money, there was no store.
You go to Goodwill, Salvation
and
Army.
there was high fashion, but nobody could afford it. So and thrift stores were overloaded with stuff. They weren't picked through. They didn't have professional buyers in those days, or vintage stores. You could just go in and create all of these wonderful costumes and identities, and everybody dressed from the 50s and all the old clothes, and took on
I wish
a new
it was
name.
still like that.
Me too.
I can barely shop at thrift stores anymore.
No,
that
you can't.
used to be like one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, I was just in New Mexico, and I tried to go thrift shopping for a day, and and it's picked over there too. They already there. They have buyers,
especially like the outskirts. I feel like they just know where to go now. Yeah,
people do this as a profession. In those days, it was, basically we would pull up in a car and go into this thrift store, and everybody would run in a different direction to try and find the coolest stuff. And
and you guys would probably find something time.
It's the years of pre polyester. So everything, you would find these amazing things that were nice to touch. And you would get, I remember my favorite was getting old Red Cross shoes, which were everybody would get these old orthopedic shoes. And you can, if you look at the band X, Exene was always wearing old orthopedic shoes, and we all had those.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So it was pretty fun.
So interesting. I love this. So with the bands that used to perform at these different spaces, what were the main ones that you remember? Not just LA bands, but bands from all over.
Yeah. Well, there was the Alley Cats, the, early on the Go-Go's, the Screamers, the Plugs, the Weirdos, the Dead Kennedys, Wall of Voodoo. Let me see. I mean, it was so many, you know.
So many. Oh my
so
God.
many. It
so
was
many good ones.
And from out of town, the Damned and Iggy and James Chance came, and the Specials, and
Oh, you mentioned Black Flag to me.
yeah. So
was it like Saccharine Trust?
Saccharine Trust, the Minutemen, the Meat Puppets, so Social Distortion, Christian Death.
Oh my God.
God, it was endless. I mean, there was just so many incredible, and they were all great.
Yeah.
L7 later on. Yeah, there was a lot of bands, and they were all playing all the time. I mean, every Friday and Saturday night, we'd go to clubs, and the clubs were easy to get into. You didn't have to plan it weeks in advance like you do now.
Yeah.
Which is so weird to me. It's like that you have to, find a band, and then you order tickets a month in advance, and then you have you have to think about where you're going to park your car and all this stuff, and then you figured out what band you wanted to see, and you would just pull up when they were coming on stage, maybe stay through one or two bands tops, be on a guest list.
There's still some places like that.
Yeah?
Yeah, they exist.
God, I
don't go to the places you're talking about, but every once in a while, but yeah, they still exist.
Yeah, it was just fun because you could just go in and see an amazing band, and then they would come off the stage, and you would be friends with that band too. Everybody was completely approachable. So the same people that were in the bands were also in the audience. So you had a pretty kind of a tight community, really, in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the nicest parts. And I remember going up to San Francisco at the same period of time, and they had that too. So there was, people knew who everybody else was. And I know now when I go, see something from that period of time, like one of those bands, you still see all the same people will come out. And that's kind of a nice thing. You recognize the faces. You may not recognize, the names.
So, have you guys ever, has Subhumans ever played?
Subhumans played.
Subhumans, Crass?
Well, the Crass wasn't from here.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
They did play.
Because Subhumans is from the UK too. Yeah. Or Sex Pistols? Did they ever come?
I did not see the Sex Pistols, I would say, but I did see...
Were they like... Did you guys, because I feel like there's a thing with the Sex Pistols because they became so commercial that they kind of lost respect, within certain scenes, I guess, that maybe I don't know.
I don't think so.
No?
I think everybody really liked them,
That's, okay, cool. Yeah.
That's what I mean, the bands that were most influential in LA weren't so much the Sex Pistols. I remember when PIL came and seeing them a couple times.
That's amazing.
And that was super fun.
Yeah.
But the bands that made a difference in LA, I remember when the Ramones first came.
Okay.
And they played the Whiskey, and that was that was an amazing show, because
Yeah.
when the Ramones came, nobody had heard music like that. It was really a
Yeah.
very new sound.
They were like one of the first, actually.
And they
right?
and they
Yeah.
embodied a lot of the stuff that Hollywood embodied, which is that they had humor in their music, you know, and that was really an important element. It's sort of the negation, the humor,
Yeah.
and the costuming, you know.
Yeah.
It's so they were important. Blondie was really an important performer at the Whiskey. Also, I'm trying to remember who else early on.
Yeah.
But you know, they all played Hollywood because Hollywood was really important. The Clash was a huge band in Los Angeles, and
Wow.
they played the Palladium. And I think that's a show everybody went to.
'Cause I think that a lot of the time, at least from my knowledge, people don't realize that the punk, or, you know, I guess I'll call it, punk music, didn't actually originate in the UK like most people think it did. It actually originated here in the US. And like mostly in New York and probably a little bit of LA too, or San Francisco, something like that, right?
Well, I mean, there was a kind of a scene
Yeah.
everywhere, and I think it was just a lot of people feeling the same
Sort
way,
of, yeah.
in slightly different ways. I mean, in the UK they had, you know, the Queen, and we had
yes.
Ronald Reagan, you know, and
very
we had
true.
we everybody was anti, you know, it was sort of post-disco, post-high record
So
production.
it was kind of all retaliation to that kind of thing.
And overproduced records, big
Yeah.
record company kind of deals, and young people being very shut out of,
Yeah.
you know,
Wanting to do their own thing.
Yeah.
DIY.
and so it kind of came up everywhere. And I think every scene is very distinctive. Like the New York scene and the New York bands were very different than the LA bands. The LA bands was
Yeah.
very, very different. And later on, the South Bay bands were even more different. You know, the Black Flag, the Minutemen, and so that's a sort of a second wave of punk in LA. The first bands, I don't know if they even saw themselves as punk. They were just bands.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
The reason why I asked about the Sex Pistols, because Lydia Lynch was on here last year around the same time, actually. And she had nothing very positive to say about the Sex Pistols, because she felt like they were kind of like a sham in a way, and because they were so commercial, they made punk kind of look like a joke in a way. And so when she was talking about that on the show, I was like,
I think I don't know, you know, I can only speak for, I can't speak for the whole scene, but I can speak for sort of the magazine and us. And we didn't really, I mean, see them as part of the scene.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that it was just music that was out there, and we liked the look.
Yeah.
But I think the thing about the Sex Pistols is that they were sort of made. It wasn't an organic.
Okay, she says something very similar, actually.
Kind of band, whereas a lot of the LA stuff was very organic. I mean, a lot of people didn't. They weren't musicians. We weren't musicians. We weren't anything. We were just, you know, kind of like a group of friends who wanted to get up on stage. So it's like anybody could be a singer, anybody could be a musician, anybody could be a performer, anybody could be, you know, dressed crazy. It was kind of like a time of invention and openness, I would say.
Yeah.
You know, and people were super interested in art. People were super interested in the beats. People were interested in old country music, Patsy Cline and Hank Williams. So the references were never the Sex Pistols for the scene.
Yeah.
The references were, you know, art and
Yeah, okay. I think you just had to like be there to actually experience what it was like, because she said something very similar. She said exactly what you're saying, but you know, she's a very strongly opinionated person, so everything she says, like if she's
awesome.
Distaste for it, she really lets you know. Yeah. So that's basically like the vibe that she gave me. But yeah, that's That's really interesting. Can you tell us any specific stories about let's see. I'm gonna say Iggy Pop. Do you have any stories about Iggy Pop?
I have no Iggy Pop stories, but I can tell you. I've never met Iggy Pop. I wish I had. I probably still could, but but I can say that he was an amazing influence on Bruce, who was my partner, who formed the magazine. I'd say that's probably his favorite music was the old blues, Iggy Pop. Yeah, for sure. That's the stuff we were listening to. The I Want to Be Your Dog is, genius.
Absolutely.
Absolute genius. So that and I'm a Human Fly by the Cramps, the two greatest songs, if you ask me,
Cramps,
ever. Yeah. So, I don't have an Iggy Pop story. I can tell you some funny stuff that we did with the magazine, because the magazine, the way we would work was to go, everybody was pretty drunk and pretty fucked up in those periods of time. And we would go to these shows at night and sort of wait for the last band to finish and grab a band and take them home. And we had built this kind of cove inside of a studio space where we would bring the bands into. And during the day, what Bruce and I would do is create a unique look for the cove, meaning we would drag pieces of palm tree in, we would tear billboards down, we would take pieces of bus benches, we would, take things off of the sides of nursery schools, and we'd come back and we'd nail it to this cove, and we would paint over it, and we would create these backdrops essentially for bands later. So then after the show, when the bands were drunk, we would bring them to the studio, and they were usually tired and a little bit relaxed and very drunk. And everybody would just hang out, and it would be sort of fun. And then Bruce would turn off the lights, and he would shoot photographs. And so it was a kind of a very unique thing that he created, where the people that were having their photographs taken just thought it was sort of a party and didn't know where the camera was coming from. They couldn't tell.
Kind of candid.
So it would just flash in the dark, and because we had sort of created this space very consciously, but everybody else saw it as just a pile of junk. We were able to have a lot of fun and take these amazing photos, and people on stage usually know how to pose for a camera, or they are more self-conscious when there's a camera pointing at them, but in this way they couldn't tell where the camera was ever. So I think we were able to get a look inside the magazine that nobody else did. Other things we did was, I remember driving the band Social Distortion out to Edwards Air Force Base because we were going to have their picture taken with the space shuttle, we thought. And I remember calling up the Edwards Air Force Base and making an appointment for No Magazine as their press secretary. And then putting everybody in the backseat of my little Saab in those days. And so I had the whole band in my car. And I remember driving through the desert for a couple hours, and we went up there and we were actually able to get in, and they showed us around, and we had lunch, and then we took photos. And we would take, one of the photographers that also worked with us was Bob Seidemann, who is a really, really famous photographer that took all of the early Jefferson Airplane and Grateful Dead photos, and he's quite famous. He took the famous Janis Joplin picture where half of her face is covered, and it's just a brilliant old poster. If you go up to Haight-Ashbury, you can buy it everywhere. But anyway, so he was up there, and we also took the band. Gosh, I'm losing my mind. I can't remember the other band we took up there, but oh my gosh, I'm blank.
It's okay.
Senior punk moment here. Anyway, we took another band up there and photographed them also. in the middle of the desert. With rockets and things like that. We took the adolescents to Disneyland, which was seemed like a perfect idea. So a lot of what the magazine did was sort of pair unusual people and take them to unusual places and put them in unusual situations. And, you know, it was really never about reporting so much of the truth. It's like each kind of thing was about creating an art project, and I think that's why it became harder and harder to publish, because we weren't publishing straight interviews. We weren't doing reportage. We were doing sort of creative work based on the way we saw the world. So it's a different kind of approach to this. That being said, I remember Christian death in my bathtub when I came home. I remember I remember people walking around in the nude in my kitchen, cooking frijoles because they were hungry. I remember people in the living room. I remember Raymond Pettibone in my living room sketching. I mean, it's just everybody in it, you know, just came through, and it was fun.
So I asked you when I met you at the book fair, who was one of your favorite bands, and you mentioned the Screamers.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you had any stories about the Screamers, and did they ever were they ever featured in the magazine?
The tomato is on the cover of the magazine, and it, you know, he was such a nice person and such a interesting person and an artist, and I think, you know, it's really, you know, again, it's all these people had such personas, but everybody was really nice. And I just loved, I loved the Screamers, and I loved Tomato, and I loved KK. And these are all people that are, you know, I'm still somewhat friendly with. I also love the Flesh Eaters, which is an early band, and Chris Desjardins is, you know, of course, still around, and they just played recently at the Echo.
He wrote a book, too.
He's wrote several books.
He's wrote several books.
I think there's like 5 or 6 now.
Okay.
And he also ran the Cinematheque, I believe.
Have you ever been to Tamada's, like, art shows?
I know his art. I have not been to the art shows. I know about the art shows, and we had the studio next to Tomato up in on Las Palmas and Hollywood Boulevard. So we had a studio right next door to him for quite some time. Okay. So he was very good friends of Bruce's as well.
And he, okay.
You want band stories from me, and I'm not so great on band stories.
No, not necessarily. Yeah, I didn't know that he was on one of the covers of one of the No Mag. Oh, wait, you have a photo.
I think I do. Hang on. Let me see here. Of course, I brought everyone but the one that's on, where he's on there, I think. Yeah. So the only one I didn't bring today is the one that he's on.
Oh, that's okay. That's totally okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that's how it is.
Tell us about the other people that are featured on the covers, and
a
little bit about the artists involved as well.
Okay.
And,
So one of our favorite artists is Raymond Pettibone. He is on the cover with a Charles Manson drawing that says "I'm sick of sex," and Raymond was the younger brother of Greg Ginn, who is Black Flag, or formed Black Flag, and so in those days Raymond was doing a lot of the album covers for Black Flag. That's what he's really known for, and a lot of band flyers for South Bay bands, Circle Jerks. He does work with them also, and anyway, so Raymond is all over these magazines, and on the cover we have Johanna Wendt on a cover also. Johanna Wendt is a performance artist, and in those days she used to get up on stage and she would make costumes, and the costumes would transform from one thing or another. There was blood, and there was animal parts, there was all kinds of things, and there was yarn and sort of totem kind of things, and one thing would evolve into another, and Johanna would perform with a band. So it was as if she was a band, but she basically would make various sounds and almost like talking in tongues kind of thing. And it was super exciting and wild to see her perform. And she's featured in these magazines a lot. We have some photos by Ed Culver, who shot for the magazine later on as well, and he has some of the early punk stuff. And Ed, because he's tall, was able to get some of the most amazing live shots ever of bands, and some of the really iconic photography from that period where he just did amazing stuff. So we had Saccharine Trust. Another artist we had was Fred Tomaselli, who is also a big artist living in Brooklyn right now. And Fred Tomaselli at that time was just straight, was straight out of school and
Wait,
doing...
how many penises does that guy have?
Quite a few. We have, let's see, Eva O is in the magazine, who just recently performed. Who else do we have here? 45 Grave. And the Plugs, that was one of my favorite bands. So the Plugs were Tito Lariva, who formed a band that came out of East LA, and they were incredible. They were amazing to see. Monitor, Middle Class, Social Distortion.
Were you at all a part of the decline of Western civilization?
Like
the Germs, right? Too?
Of course, the Germs. I forgot the Germs. How can you forget
I just thought
the
of
Germs?
that just now. Yeah.
And the Gun Club, another amazing LA band. God, yeah, that's what I mean. There were just so many, you know. Penelope Spears is all over these magazines. She appears in 3 or 4 of our issues, and we've done photo shoots with her and interviews with her and all kinds of stuff. So she was somebody we knew quite well. Who else?
So you would interview these people, right?
Yeah, and
different bands,
and then sort of riff off of that. So again, they're not straight interviews.
Yeah, which is my favorite thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that the magazine holds up. It holds up graphically because it was never really about presenting truth.
Yeah, it's more loose.
Yeah.
It's more fun.
And also every element was creative, like the layouts are creative, the photo shoots, the backgrounds, the people themselves are interesting. And it was really about trying to capture the spirit of the times. Another band, Tex and the Horseheads, the Superheroines, Nervous Gender, all great bands, all amazing bands. Artists in the magazine are Peter Chung, who went on to do Aeon Flux. So we were the first.
It's like one of my all-time favorite animated shows. Oh my god!
Yeah.
You have no idea how much this means to me.
So we were.
Okay.
Lane Smith was another artist. Of course, who else? X, Legal Weapon, I think I mentioned them already. The Flyboys. Gosh. And then the rockabilly bands, the Hollywood Hillbillies.
So would you interview these bands yourself with other?
I did a couple interviews in these magazines personally.
Yeah.
I also contributed some drawings, and I did a lot of the layout. and almost all of the layout. I sold all the ads.
Yeah.
And did the layout on those. I did the distribution. I mean, everybody did everybody. Bruce and I, and there was also Frank Gargani, a photographer that worked with us early on. I mean, I think, you know, it was all Bruce's vision, and yeah, it was Bruce's vision, sort of imprinted on all of us, and we would just go out and drag interesting people back and do crazy stuff with them. So some of the bands we interviewed, and some of the bands we just told stories about, and some of the bands we published stories about that we thought what it should be like to interview them.
Yeah.
So this is the photo shoot out in the desert. One of them, the Social Distortion that I was talking about. The Vandals.
After you tell the story, it's like great to actually see like the photos, and
yeah,
that's really good.
Let's see what else.
Roz Williams.
Oh, Roz.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Wow, like everyone.
No, everybody's in here. I mean, and if I, you know, now I have this cabinet where I have all the negatives, and I think we shot every band in Los Angeles at some point. And actually, Bruce, I remember at one point went with Roz to his home, which is his family home, which was in Tustin. And he drove out there, and I remember hearing the story of how Roz lived on the edge of this sort of farmland, undeveloped farm country, and it was the only house out there. And yeah, it was just this great story about how this guy that was the first in goth, right?
Definitely.
Here's a list of bands from Sub-Hollywood, which is a book we wrote. But if you read it, you can just see what was up in LA.
Oh my God. Between 77 and 82. That's a lot of bands.
And that's not all of them, I'm sure. That's who's in the magazine.
Yeah, bands. I mean, of course, I haven't heard of like a lot of these.
But what's fun is the names.
Yeah, I know. I guess I'll read some of them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've heard of the Urinals. Castration Squad. Fibonacci's.
Amazing band.
Oh, I know Rick Elric.
The Fibonacci's were a band that riffed off of, I guess, cultural music from other countries, and would incorporate it into their punk. And Maggie Song was the lead singer, and she's all over the magazine as well, so are the Fibonacci's.
There's Toxic Shock. Detroit. I've heard of. That's a her, right? Yeah, I've heard of her. Overkill, Ozzy Hairs, Youth Brigade. I used to like Youth Brigade when I was younger.
Yeah.
I honestly can't listen to them anymore, but I did like them at one point. The Slashers, The Outsiders, The Screws, Spitting Teeth, The Vidiots, Stingers, and the list goes on. Millions of Dead Cops. Great name. Battalion of Saints, Stepmothers, Fast Freddy, Toiling Midgets. Amazing. Thank you.
It's for you.
Oh, really?
The book.
Oh my God.
So the book is if you turn the book over, this is the book Sub-Hollywood. There's a disclaimer under the picture, which maybe you could read, which is
okay.
This book, the quote.
Oh,
sorry.
I was like, okay. So it says the quotes from Bruce Chen or
Kane, which is actually Bruce Kalberg, who's the publisher of the magazine. It's written under a pseudonym, and we put that out.
Okay. It says this is an autobiographical novel written by a person who is quite possibly less intelligent than yourself.
Which I think just about sums it up.
I love that so much. Yeah. That's how I feel when I do interviews sometimes.
Yeah. I think that's how we all
I don't know what I'm doing, but, it's fun.
Yeah.
That's really great. Thank you so much for this book.
You're welcome.
I'm going to read
You're welcome.
this.
That's a book we published in 2005 about the LA scene. So I know you as a fan.
Definitely.
And I can tell you read, so it's exciting to me.
I try
But
to.
it has a Gary Panter cover, and Gary Panter went on. I mean, I think what was known for in the day was he created the Jimbo comic, which was the sort of precursor character, or it defined what punk should look like in art in a way.
Yeah.
And so he created that, but what he's known for is he won several Emmys for the Pee-wee's Playhouse. He designed all of
yeah,
the
you told me about that.
stuff. And there's a Raymond Pettibone in there, and there's a Rolling Stone review by Michael Gilmore on the back. So it's a pretty good read, and it's a fictionalized sort of story about what it's like to publish a magazine and be in Hollywood during that period of time. But I think if one was interested in that, you would get a real sense of what Hollywood was like, and many of the questions you're asking me.
Oh yeah, the Dead Boys.
Yeah.
I see them here.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
Yeah. That's what's amazing. It's just the list goes on and on and on and on. And they were all good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like all these bands and all these people were good. And not only that, many of them are still good now. You know, that's the thing, is that a lot of this stuff really holds up.
Yeah, speaking of, I just saw Saccharine Trust.
Oh, wow.
Maybe it wasn't too recently, but it was last year sometime. And it was really great. And they played like in a really, shitty hole in the wall somewhere. But there was a bunch of kids that, know who they are and like love them. And it was really fun.
Have you seen L7?
I've never seen L7, but I've wanted to.
Okay,
yeah.
so L7 is performing again after 15 years. I mean, a lot of these bands have reformed. And they're amazing. L7 is, I just saw them a couple times recently, and they just blew me away. They were just, those girls rock like they were, 18 years old.
Yeah. Were they were around at that time?
Yeah.
I did not know that. For some reason, like, when bands
Susie,
actually
L7.
get popular, you assume that they actually came out like the time that they are, getting actually like, popular.
Well, they were
around a lot longer before that. Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a photo of Maggie Song from the Fibonacci's right here, and these are some of the sets that we talked about where we would make.
Yeah. The palm.
Make the crazy sets. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, those photos are awesome.
The Circle Jerks, Keith Morris.
Oh, before he did stuff with his...
Everybody looks like children. Everybody looks like children here now, but these are. I mean, I think that's the amazing thing, is all these people are still playing. They still have something to say. Yeah, they're still relevant, and I think I remember going to see like revival bands, or when all of a sudden at Disneyland you'll see, somebody that used to be famous kind of thing.
At Disneyland?
And I mean, I guess my point is that all of these bands, when I go see them, they've evolved. When you see Mike Watt play now, it's fucking amazing. It's just fucking amazing, It's like the sort of wall of sound that comes at you. And it's, and all these people just grew. They grew as musicians, they grew as human beings, they grew as, sort of politically, All these people are alive on Instagram still, So,
True.
And active.
True.
I mean, they're either dead or they're making noise.
Yeah.
There's not much in between. I don't think anybody sort of gave up the fight. They just.
I'm really happy they're still working and stuff.
Yeah.
Really happy about that. There's always some sort of like revival going on like every so often, where like a certain sort of scene and music will become popular again. And I don't really know if I'm making sense, but I think that like what I've noticed lately is definitely punk has always been around. Like for me growing up, it's always existed, which you can't say that for a lot of other different like kinds of scenes and genres of music and stuff. Like punk has always been around because when I was 14, that's when I was like starting to get into it. And I just, like anywhere I go, like I went from Hawaii to where there's still a very like pretty, you know, I think there's a pretty serious punk scene there still. It's a little backwards though, like it's a very slow moving.
Does it have to do with like skate culture?
You know, surfing, skate, that's a whole thing too.
They took that and they really ran with it. I mean, a lot of the
Definitely,
early sort of backdrop music for all of that.
Yeah, there's a lot
punk.
of pop punky, but there's a hardcore scene there too. You know, there's there's like, you know, a ska scene that still exists there, which is so mind-boggling to me. But it's really cool. It like I said, it's a very slow-paced kind of, you know, place to live. So everything moves a lot slower and things go away a lot slower. And I it's funny that those things have never gone away. And even moving to LA after that, when I was 18, there's still always a punk scene that exists that will never go away.
I think punk is an attitude as much as it is a music form, you know, and I think there's a lot of stuff now, you know, it's a good time to be
Definitely.
a punk, you know.
I feel like
there's a lot of stuff to be pissed off about right now, you know.
The same thing, it reminded me of when I was talking to Lydia Lunch about it. She also mentioned how punk was more of an attitude too. And so, you know, like calling the scene punk wasn't really what you guys did, actually, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But everything needs a label.
It was about, it was about a tone, and, you know, it was a lot about sort of like Dada, you know, like taking things and turning them on their side and just questioning why things had to be a certain way and going like, well, what if they were this way instead? And, you know, sort of challenging authority or challenging the norm in a lot of ways, and challenging with a lot of humor, I would say, you know, and with all the shitty politics that we have going on now, like where you wake up every day and, you know, it gets worse than the day before and you can't believe it. You know, it's a really great time for punk.
Yeah, that's what they say about, like, music starts to get a little, you know, better too, maybe. Maybe that's not the right way to...
it's
not
true.
Better necessarily. It's true. Yeah, the economy
It's
starts
because
to
you
bend.
realize you have to fight for the things that
it kind of
that
wakes
you
people
want.
up a little bit.
Yeah.
I think, you know, maybe things were a little bit more dormant.
Yeah.
And then it wakes people up. It definitely woke me up. Like, I was never really a follower of politics, honestly. And I can't say that I am that much right now, but I definitely am now more so than I ever have been, which is really weird.
Because you're going to find the things that you believe in threatened at some point.
Definitely.
And it's, you know,
like
I mean,
Planned Parenthood, for example.
Climate control,
Climate control.
You know, it's
definitely.
Like, you know, it's treating people like people instead of like, you know, trash, you know.
Definitely.
It's and
women's rights.
It's just human values are things that I think we all, you know, sort of softened up a little bit on, and everybody got a little bit complacent and quiet, and now I think, at least personally, I'm realizing that I'm going to have to fight to get these things back, and it's weird for me because I've lived through a conservative time, and then it got crazy time. You know, I lived through the hippies too, so it's like there's this period of time where it's sort of free love and it's open, and then you have punk and you're just like going for it all the time, and then the last 15 years where you just thought things were going to get better. That felt like they were going to get better, but they've gotten worse. So it's time time to do some get some creative energy going.
I agree, and it's sad, that this person is our president right now, but it's also creating some good things at the same time.
I certainly,
like
I certainly hope something good will come out of it.
Yeah, I think if anything, I think hopefully this will maybe get people to pay attention a little bit more to what's going on in the world.
Right. I think we're all going to have
generally.
to, because we've now seen what happens when we go to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so this is, I guess this is like a thing that happens like every decade, right? Every 10 years or so, where someone will come into office, people are like, no, like, fuck,
right?
Yeah. Well, I guess I want to ask you a little bit more about what your how do I say what you did with the magazine, and like what were your favorite moments, and maybe like talk a little bit about Bruce.
So
how did you meet Bruce?
I met Bruce at the LA Weekly, where, again, I was the art director, and he was working there very temporarily in the, I think, in the accounting room for a minute or two, and I remember walking into him, and we just instantly connected. And I remember him taking me by the hand and going, come on. And we walked out of this sort of ratty building on Sunset where the Weekly was. We went downstairs, and he had this old VW Bug parked downstairs, and it was filled completely with magazines. The front seat, the back seat. I mean, it's like it looked like he was living in it almost. And he opened the door, and he said, this is what I make. And he showed me the issue, and he said, come on. And then we walked around the corner to where he lived, and he goes, so do you want to live together? And I said, okay. And it was that fast. And it was literally within 2 weeks of meeting each other. He hadn't let his place go, and all the magazines were in my car and in my house. And that's how it began.
So he started in 1978, and it was 4 issues in.
Yeah,
and then
and then he shows up at my house, and Frank Gargani, who was the photographer that he was working with at that point. So him and Frank had this old Mercury, and like really kind of cherried out, and we'd ride around in this old car, all of us, and they would go interview bands, and we would just, sort of in the morning there would just be this itinerary of things that had to happen. We're going to find this band, we're going to find an artist that does this, and that's how the days were spent, and then I'd go off to work, and then it'd be like Bruce would say, okay, we need to sell some ads because we got to have this thing printed, and I'd go up and down Melrose and go into stores and ask them to buy ads. And at one point, Bruce and I opened a bank account, and he wanted to make No Mag official, so I remember we had a 53 Ford, aqua colored 53 Ford that would not start most of the time, or needed a push start. So I remember push starting the car, and we drove to Beverly Hills, and we went to the Bank of Beverly Hills where we opened the first No Mag account. And so once every month we would drive to the Bank of Beverly Hills in the car to check on our business. It was pretty fun. Oh, I can tell you another cool thing we did. We had a couple benefits. We had one benefit that was in I guess a set of recording studios out in the valley, and it was kind of the equivalent of a garage, and the Bangs, which before they were the Bangles, played. So that was their first show, and a lot of other bands played, and it was really fun. And then afterwards we recorded a radio commercial with the Bangles, which is still, you can still find that on the internet.
YouTube?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you can find, if you look up NOMAG radio commercial or Bangles, you can get that, and it's really pretty wonderful, pretty special. We also put out 2 records. We put out a record. They were flexi discs that were inserted in the magazine. So, one with Geza X, who is a music producer. Who started out at the Mask producing all the bands, and is still doing it now, and now is working on a film about the punk era. And another one with Wild Kingdom, which was a band out of East LA. So those were kind of unusual things that we did. So we were a magazine, again, like sort of expanding the idea of what a magazine is or does. So we were sort of, a little mini record company. We were doing just all kinds of strange little things, and I don't think anybody was really doing that stuff in that era. What else can I tell you about? So Bruce and I met. He moved in, and we...
Sorry, were you guys living in Hollywood?
We were.
You were living in Hollywood? Okay.
We were living off of Melrose and Western on Serrano Street.
Okay. And so what was it like living in Hollywood then?
Well, living in Hollywood then was, there were the places people would go is there was a place called Johnny's Steakhouse on Hollywood Boulevard, which was sort of a poor man's version of a steakhouse.
Outback?
And had a mural. No, more like... It was like Musso and Frank's, which was the high end, and Johnny's was the low end. Okay. On the Hollywood Boulevard, and had murals on the walls, and we'd go up there. There was some Indian restaurants, and there was lots of burrito places.
Always.
And as always, there was no K-Town. There, that non-existent.
Oh, what? So Chinatown and Koreatown. No, Chinatown
and
Little Tokyo.
And Little Tokyo was very tiny too. I mean, it was only a block long. And so and in Little Tokyo there was a place called also Suhiro, which is still there.
It's still there. I go there.
Which used to be open.
In the wee hours?
I don't remember if it was 24 hours, but it might have been open till like 2 or 3 or something like that.
I love that place.
And there was the Pantry downtown, which in those days was 24 hour, and you would, we'd wind up there in Philippe's.
Oh, wow.
These were, and that's the old Hollywood places, and Musso's. And, so life then was... I don't know, it's just hard to describe. I mean, we'd all work during the day, and then we'd go to clubs at night. And there was still a pretty good gay scene also. So there were a lot of dance clubs that were opening, and a lot of sort of gay punk.
Like queercore?
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you into that?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's again, at the early part of the scene, it wasn't separate. I mean, it's like nobody thought about like what color you were. Nobody thought about, what religion you were. Nobody thought about whether you were gay or straight or any of that stuff. It was really very much mixed together, so it was just, like we talked about, it was the attitude. It was a way of looking at the world, and feeling like an outsider within the world. It wasn't,
And then coming together as a bunch of outsiders.
just that like people that want to have fun, and it really wasn't. Yeah, punk didn't discriminate.
Yeah.
At all, against anybody. I mean, it was open to anybody.
Have you ever seen Limp Wrist?
No.
I love that band.
Don't know that band.
We're talking about queercore. I don't believe they're from LA, but or are they? I don't know. I don't think so though.
Yeah, I don't know them.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask about the goth scene as well. Like, was that very much like you guys would all mix
that happens
together?
later. That happens later.
Okay.
There's Christian Death. There was 45 Gray. There was a lot of bands that sort of, started to
So 80s.
Yeah.
Once you step into the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It starts to be a little different. And yeah, 80s,
Yeah.
like mid 80s. You see that.
Mm-hmm. Were you into that at all? Like even after No Mag? Like
I'm into all of it.
you delved into all of those.
I'm into all of it. I mean, when No Mag ended, I started working for a film company, and
Okay.
I was working all the time, and almost everybody that worked with me or for me
Yeah.
was also in bands. I mean, I took all my friends with me, and the place was right across the street from a place called Club Lingerie, which was across the street, and so we would come out of work and go to Club Lingerie and then go back into work, sometimes not even go home.
Would you go straight to work after that?
Sometimes, yeah.
That doesn't happen.
No,
right?
I know it can't happen
No.
now. It can't. None of that can happen now. That's why it was so crazy. I mean, there were after hours clubs. There was the Zero and 01. John Pocono ran all these places, which were really almost like a speakeasy kind of situation. So people would go there after clubs and just sit on couches and
sounds so
talk
fun.
till the sun came up, and
Yeah.
then they'd go wherever they went. So it was fun.
This was like on the weekdays too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a kind of a 24-hour, 7-day a week kind of thing where you kind of always knew where everybody was. And it wasn't really about making the scene. It was just like that's what you did. It was like part of who you were. Or at least for me it was very much that. Again, the scene didn't require planning.
Yeah.
It just required, you just
show up.
Yeah, you just show up.
Yeah, if you show up, you're there.
Yeah. So.
Who are some of your favorite like goth bands? You can just name one or two.
Well, I don't know. I really liked Christian Death, and I really liked 45 Grave was an amazing band, and I'd say those were two bands that I followed. It's really funny. It's like when I look at the magazines now, I don't remember what's in what magazine because I've opened and closed them and lived it so many times that my chronology of events is messed up,
Yeah, no, I don't.
It's like I'm really aware of it, and it's like if somebody brings up something, it's like, oh yeah, I did that. But it was because we lived sort of fast and a lot, and it was all like one long day. I mean, I had 10 years that was one long day to me, and it blurs together. So it's not so much that I forget, but it's a big blur because we did a lot.
Yeah, and
and it was crazy.
77 from 84, there was a lot going on. I mean, you had like your No Wave too. You said James Chance came here. I'm sure you hung out with Lydia Lunch. I'm assuming
She's in the magazine.
Yeah.
She's all over the magazine.
Um,
Yeah, Bruce loved Lydia. She
Oh,
came over.
yeah.
That we had a studio, and he built a set
she's
on her.
really funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, kind of difficult to talk to because she kind of has very strong opinions about everything.
Well, that's
No,
the beauty of
but, like,
Lydia.
I guess what I'm trying to say is like something was mentioned about something, and I was like, I had a very strong opinion too, so we were kind of fighting about it. Which was funny because I feel like as an interviewer, you're not really supposed to. You're just supposed to let them talk, But I felt so strongly about it that I like went in and like I was like, oh. But no, I love her. She's so great, so funny, like really awesome personality. And I could say the same for you too. You're really fun to talk to. Thank you so much. Like I really appreciate the time.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Yeah. But yeah, and saying that like you've experienced a whole lot with that whole thing and No Mag and outside of No Mag, I would say like, after the 80s started, there's a whole lot of stuff happening that can you tell us a little bit about it? Like,
Oh my God.
like no. I mean specifically like with No Wave, with a little bit more about like maybe like politics, if you can like take us down that route a little bit.
I could take you down a different route.
Okay.
After the mid 80s, I think what happened, I can talk about it a little more culturally. I think what happened to a lot of people is they got a little bit older and had to work.
Yeah.
And couldn't maintain the sort of fucked up lifestyle of being out 24 hours a day and going on. And a lot of people were looking for a way to monetize what they did, or they were just too burned out.
Yeah.
And so I know personally, both Bruce and I mean, I got more and more into advertising and films, and sort of the music scene had changed. It's like a lot of the hardcore punk started to take over, and it really wasn't what we were interested in.
It's more angry.
Yeah, it was not fun to go out. You know, you'd come back bruised, and it wasn't fun. The music was still great, but the atmosphere wasn't as fun. And I think for a lot of people, they just looked about different ways, you know, because we weren't musicians, we were artists. And so, you know, our lives went in a slightly different direction. It really was about making stuff and not necessarily putting it out publicly. So I wouldn't say we didn't go out as much. I think we just did different things. So it's difficult for me to talk about music in the 90s.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I mean, I went to see a band here and there. I went to do this and that. But my life changed. You know, I still go see music, but I don't go clubbing like I used to. So it's, you know, again, I'm not the best person to talk to about that. I mean, I go, I go to art galleries, I go to museums. You know, these days I teach.
Yeah.
So it's a slightly different way that I live. That being said, you know, I just bought a ticket for the Yardbirds. I'm going to go see that. I saw L7 a bunch of times.
Do you like Depeche Mode?
I do. I do.
Are you going to see them?
I just heard that they're where are they playing?
It's May 22nd, so it's this weekend.
I got another book fair this weekend.
Oh, but they're playing in Anaheim.
Yeah.
And then I think they're playing in Sacramento. After that, I don't know. But the tickets are pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Well,
See, that's the other thing that happened is that tickets used to be, you know, tops like $12, you know, and now to go out at night is like, you know, it's a $75 night, and that's a lot still for most people.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty universal, but they're also really fantastic. But yeah, the cheapest ticket you can buy for Depeche Mode for a really shitty seat is $88.
That's crazy.
It's not even, like, I remember I saw New Order recently, and
how is it?
That it was so good.
I love that band.
I cried. Yeah, so many of those songs, like we have so many songs that are just like really, really good. But yeah, it made me like really emotional, and they still sound great. And the tickets were like $40, or well, it turned out to 50 after all the other charges. But yeah, I mean. That's still a lot. But
see, these days I'd like to see Kendrick Lamar.
Oh, yeah.
I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, I heard he puts on a really good show.
Yeah. But, you know, it's horrible because I watch, like, the Grammys, and there's nobody on the Grammys I ever want to see.
I don't know anybody who's on the Grammys.
Yeah.
so I'm just like, what is going on?
But I've done the advertising for the Grammys, so it's like it's a weird thing, you know. It's like a little bit of the world I live in, but it's also the world I really have no interest in.
Who are some of your favorite bands now, besides Kendrick Lamar? Or like music?
Let's see. I'm trying to think who I listen to. I listen to The National. It's a band I like that's current. I listen to, my gosh, I have to look at my phone because I have I'm pretty spaced out this whole week. Like I said, like where we started, I'm like, I don't even know who
But being
I like.
asked questions on the spot, especially about music that you're into, is always hard.
You don't
have
I know when I listen to my own music, I tend to go backwards. So I listen to, Iggy, or I'll listen to the Cramps, or I'll listen to.
Have you seen Iggy?
Or the Birds? Yeah.
You did, yeah. I bet he was fun.
A few times. It's always fun. It's always perfect. It's. I like a lot of. I like a lot of rap, but I haven't seen much. I've never seen rap, actually. I've never been to a rap concert.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested in going to see that.
Who's your favorite? One of your favorites? Like any era of rap.
Oh, well, I mean...
Or maybe this question, I still keep asking the same kind of question.
I always loved Biggie Smalls, and I always loved Tupac,
Good answer. Do you think that they're still alive, or do you think that they're actually, like, gone?
Well, Biggie's gone. There's no Biggie, there's no Tupac.
Okay.
It's not possible to go see them. But that's kind of where the era that I was still actively buying music and listening to stuff. And, prior to that, I went through a lot of the sort of Seattle grunge stuff. And, I like that, a lot of that.
Oh, yeah. What was... Were you into Nirvana?
I was.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard Nirvana, the Bleach album, and I just remember thinking like that it was really something. It was
a solid album.
It sounded different than anything else, in the moment, and it was really exciting stuff. So yeah, Nirvana, Soundgarden, I used to like a lot, and then way back when I used to like the bands like The Fall. Was another band I liked.
Like more post-punky sort of era, whatever you want to call it.
Some of it, yeah.
Because The Fall was around.
And my
all-time
all-time favorite stuff was Suicide. I love Suicide.
Good choice.
I was obsessed with Suicide, and I still can put that on, and it takes me back to
Have you seen Martin Rev play?
I have.
He played recently at Zebulon.
Yeah, and how was that?
I didn't see it. I wanted to. But
I would have loved
to.
to.
Or something, yeah.
Yeah, that's something I would have been interested in.
Yeah.
I like Sonic Youth. I don't know. The younger bands, I hear things and I will tape things, but I don't, it's different because we used to buy an album and listen to it over and over and over and over. And now I hear songs on the radio. And because I don't get out to see a lot of the bands as much, it's harder to tell, I can tell you a song I might like, but I don't.
Like the album and what they're maybe a little bit about the artist and what they look like. Even.
Yeah, I don't have a clue, and it's like I think you have to really, really work at it in a different way. And I just I wish I was more tuned in, but when I work, I can't listen to music to do what I do, so I have to catch it in the car mostly right now.
What's your favorite radio station?
KCRW is what I've been listening to, but that's just mostly because that's the hours I drive, and and I listen to Stella Stray Pop, KXLU sometimes, and I listen to Jonesy's Jukebox sometimes.
I do too.
Yeah, so
yeah, he's pretty funny.
Yeah, so
he also burps a lot.
Yeah.
Also, his interviews are great because they're not that like serious sometimes, which I appreciate. He's fun. He also interviews people that, like, that we probably were into or still are. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay, well, if NOMAG was still around right now, what would you want to put in it?
Oh,
Last question.
wow, great question. So I've actually thought about NOMAG being around, and we decided, I mean, Bruce passed away 5 years ago now, and we had talked about whether we would ever do anything or an anthology or something like that, and we always chose not to because we thought we couldn't do what we did in this time frame. It was different, but since I've been out and doing the book fairs and talking to a lot of people and thinking about what the magazine did or didn't do, I think if I was to do it now, I actually think there's an interest and a sort of a hunger for something that isn't not so much computer generated, but something that feels a little more unpredictable. So I'm not sure who would go in it, but I can tell you that I would want to make something that is unpredictable and work with young artists and try to create, what we did then, which is situations that didn't blend comfortably together, and be as surprised about what came out of that as, it's just something less controlled. I think everything now is so designed to be so, that's the word, designed. It's so heavily designed and marketed that I would like something that has some degree of openness to it.
Would it be a physical magazine, or would you put it on the computer online? Physical. Thank you. Yeah. I would love to see another physical NOMAG. Yeah.
So I think there's something coming. There's actually something in the works.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about your book fair situation right now before we go?
Yeah. So, this particular weekend I'm doing it's funny, I never thought about doing book fairs, but it sort of came to me. Printed Matter in New York approached me about the magazine, and simultaneously Ruka magazine did an article on us, and so suddenly publishing and art fairs have become a thing, and now I guess I'm in it and I'm doing them. That's what I can tell you about it. I'm out there selling No Magazine, and this weekend I'll be at the 8 Ball event, and next year Printed Matter.
Great, and I hope whoever's listening will be able to go to these book fairs, because they're really it's such a great experience. And I met Eva through going to one of them, and she inspired me to want to do this interview because of her wealth of knowledge. And NOMAG magazine is, if you can check it out, it's really, 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 really cool, you guys. So try to make it to one of these book fairs and meet Eva, check out the magazines, see the Sub-Hollywood book. I'm so happy to own this now. I'm definitely going to look through it tonight. And thank you so much, Eva.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Good. Well, we have to go, but thank you so much. And thank you for listening. This is SS Extension Course.
In Conversation was produced by Dublab, a nonprofit radio station broadcasting live from Los Angeles since 1999. Sound editing and theme song by Matea Baim. For more programming, visit dublab.com. And thank you for listening.